Coming to you live from Homer, Alaska, it's Zinc Comics Unleashed with your host, Brian Payne. That's me. Welcome to our first episode. I intend for this live stream to become a weekly half-hour show, albeit who knows if I can talk that much or if anyone cares to listen to me do so. We'll just have to see, I guess. But for now, consider this a work in progress, a pilot looking to be picked up for the fall season. Who am I? I am a cartoonist from beneath the underground and the creator of Zinc Comics. The Zinc Comics group includes numerous net comics as well as a series of periodicals. I self-publish under my own Darshan Studios imprint. I was born in Ottumwa, Iowa, just like Radar O'Reilly and the all-too-real Tom Arnold. I currently live with my wife Skywalker in Homer, Alaska, the cosmic hamlet by the sea. Like most kids, I watched Saturday morning cartoons on television and read the Sunday funny papers. But other than a few Mad magazines, I never really read many comic books. It wasn't until I began studying sign painting after high school and I was asked to letter one of the things that I really became interested in comics. The artist gave me a few comics to read so I could see how comic book lettering was done, and I immediately recognized the art form's limitless potential. Yet it was not until a few years later that I actually began to draw my own comics. In the early 90s, I was living in the same Chicago neighborhood as Daniel Klaus and Chris Ware, and they would occasionally come into the copy shop I was working at. And seeing their original pages made me finally want to sit down and try them myself. The Zinc Comics special #1, Red Mosquito, is now available online from the Zinc Comics Shop, zinccomicsshop.storeenvy.com. Although I alone created the Red Mosquito, my superhero soon took on a life of its own. Originally a minor character intended to provide some much-needed comic relief, the Mosquito quickly became the star of the Cosmic Hamlet strip and began to demand a spin-off series. This title was intended to be part of a new shared universe of Alaskan superheroes. I must admit, however, that I am no longer sure if I'm part of this official solar system or if I've been Plutoed at this point. I drew these pages thinking they would be printed in full color by a third party, and perhaps one day I'll receive the necessary funding I thought I already had to release a colorized edition. I've decided to go ahead and self-publish the book in stark black and white as a signed and numbered limited edition of 200 in the meantime. Anyway, as the King Cat John Porcellino says, color is a tool of the man. You don't need color. Color is a distraction. It's giving in to the spectacle. Now, speaking of king cats, or at least cool cats, hanging out with me today is Dean Westerino. Welcome, Dean.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm very honored to be your first guest.
Yeah, well, I'm glad somebody came here. I'd be monologuing for a half an hour, and I could only vamp for about that long. Now, I know you got a lot of stuff going on, and I know you work with Jeff G. I won't even try to enunciate his last name.
I'll say it. Jeff Garino and Dean Westerfield. We're Westerino Comics.
Okay. And you guys have put on 3 books that I know of, or 2 so far and 1 coming up. But hopefully we can get Jeff on here to talk about that stuff, and we might get into it later. But right off the bat, I want to talk about some of your solo stuff. Recently on Facebook, you've been posting some old sketchbook comics you did that seem to have like Arabic and Aztec type origins. Do you know what I?
That was a book called. When I started comics, I just did like little, the mini comics, ran them through a Xerox machine. And so I came across the original sketchbooks. I drew them as sketchbooks. And the ones you're talking about there are from a 20-page story called Isis and Historical Art Journey. And I just basically took the Isis myth about Osiris being killed by Set and his body being chopped up and scattered to the winds. And I had Isis traveling the globe, gathering up pieces, which I depicted as puzzle pieces. And so every different world or country or culture she went into, I shifted the style, but I kept Isis looking in an Egyptian style. And I did that, oh gosh, I don't know, probably like 94, 95. I just came across a sketchbook and started putting it up because I liked the way it looked. I actually was, anytime I look at my old work, and I'm sure you feel the same way, I can't stand looking at it. And I looked at these and I went, hey, I like these drawings. So I just went ahead and posted isolated images, and people did like them.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting stuff, and I didn't realize you'd been doing it that long, but I guess I should have, because you're a little younger than me, but that about works out. I started in 91. You said around 94, 95 for you?
Yeah. I noticed in your opening remarks there, you and I kind of led a little bit of a parallel life there, in that I grew up not reading comics. And I did read newspaper comics. I read those every day. That was like a ritual. And I never got into comics until, early 90s, I guess. I'm guessing 91, 92, somewhere around there. I was looking for ways to tell stories, and I was like playing around with movies. And that wasn't working because you needed so many people to show up. And then I decided I can just do like adult children's books where maybe had an illustration and some caption on each page. And then I met Jeff Garino at Cal State Long Beach in a literature class, and he said something about, he did a little presentation about Mouse for adolescent literature as the class. And I went, oh, that's how I should be telling my stories. So that's how I got to comics. So I didn't read comic books. I never grew up on superheroes. I didn't read, anything other than newspaper comics. So we're kind of in the same boat. And I immediately started making one-page comics, and I gave them to the school paper, Cal State Long Beach, that is. And then I just kind of started branching out longer stories, and and I've been doing them ever since then. I just kind of fell into it, and I had a little outlet by publishing them in the student paper at Cal State Long Beach. So I got some immediately published. Not that anybody cared, but it was kind of fun seeing them in print. The earliest comics I ever did were actually in print.
Yeah, we have very parallel stories, because like you, I was making 8mm films, and
Cool.
that to me was, I was a frustrated filmmaker. And when I was lettering this comic, I was like, well, this is like film. You are telling a story, words, pictures. So I immediately said, and being kind of a self-control freak, where I wanted to be in control of everything, it was perfect for my personality. And
it's beautiful because you're the actor, you're the director, you're the set dresser, script writer, lighting. You get to do everything, and you didn't have to rely on people showing up. I like working with people. I guess that's why Jeff and I get along so well. I do like working with people, but people let you down, So I've been lucky to find a partner that's been sticking with me for, I don't know, about 10, 15 years. I think we've been making comics.
Yeah, that's very admirable. And like you, my first comics were printed in free paper in Chicago. And I've always liked the strip more than the comic book. And I always wanted to do a strip, and it just never worked out, but my original comics were a comic strip. And it was about a rock and roll star named, I had a band, and the band broke up, and I immediately started doing a comic about a band. And my pseudonym, or the character who I represented, was Zinc Alloy, and that's how come I've started doing the Zinc Comics has been my title. Yes,
I kind of wondered that name goes all the way back to the beginning. All right, that's cool.
Yeah. Zinc Alloy is kind of my Ziggy Stardust, but it was inspired by a T-Rex record, Zinc Alloy and the Hidden Riders of Tomorrow,
okay.
which at that time was an import that I'd only heard about. It was released in America as Light of Love, but Zinc Alloy does go back to the beginning, and that's why it's been everything I do is Zinc since. So a lot of people confuse me with the Metal Men from DC, but no, it's T-Rex, you know.
Yeah, you and I both share that love of music. Even my earliest attempts at comics, before I realized I could do more, I want to say junior high, like 7th or 8th grade, I started, because I read newspaper comics, and I had this idea I was going to do a newspaper comic, the classic 4 or 5 panel strips. And I have none of the drawings, but I actually designed like it was 4 friends, and one was like a little heavy metal rocker dude, one was a punk, one was what we called a neuro. I don't know if that means anything. A new romantic, I guess, is what it stood for.
Okay.
And one was like a hippie. And I drew. I don't remember doing stories, but I must have did a few. And then I realized, sayonara, that's too much for me. But years later, the young ones, right? I had this right.
Right.
I saw this one. I went, "Hey, there's my comic strip." I never made. I have no evidence that existed, but I was very happy to discover the young ones.
Yeah, you were the precursor.
Even had names.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, since we're talking about music, let's get into B-Sides, your solo book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I was working with Jeff for collaborating on these longer works. Moses took about 8 to 10 years to complete, and we took about 2 years to do Amboy. And then is there something else in there? And then I just decided, like, okay, I'm gonna do some music comics, and I just wanted to kind of go back to like what I originally was doing with my older comics, which are just kind of short pieces. And so I just did what I love, which is music. And the first one's kind of more punk rock oriented, and there was no like larger design in it. I just was piecing together stories, and then they kind of spin off of each other. And it wasn't just me talking about the music, but it was autobiographical. I wanted to put myself in there. So I think on the YouTube channel, you can see a little drawing of me. That's a still from the first B-Sides, which is punk rock. And I got a really good response on that. And they were cheaper to print. Oh, they were so cheap. I could, I could buy them. I could sell them at a reasonable price, and it just worked out better. Doing the 200-page books and the 600-page books, it was such a bite in the wallet, and I just really liked this little book. So on my first issue of that, I swore I was gonna. I promised myself. I put on the inside front cover. I was gonna do another issue was gonna be about a jazz player, Albert Ayler. And I put it in the front. Next up, Albert Ayler. And I'm currently working on it, so I'm good for my word. It's going to take a while to get the issue out. And that book has just become larger. I was kind of expecting just to do another, 28, 32 page, whatever book that was going to have some Ayler pieces in it. And I think this thing's, I'm shooting for about 100 pages at this point. I don't know if I'll quite reach 100 pages, if I'll burn out or whatever, but I'm at 30, I think I got 31 pages drawn out and 28 inked, and I've got another 20 some pages laid out ready to draw. And I'm still kind of taking it, doing it in the same way I did the original B-Sides, where I'm just picking a subject and playing with it. I'm inserting myself into it, but I'm not really, I kind of have like loose, like it's set up in sections, like loose themes. And the first one's about childhood and the idea of improvisation. So it's it's about being a kid. It's about how kids make noise. We play at making noise. It's about Ayler and maybe taking his free music and relating it back to kids. I found beautiful anecdotes from Ayler about playing in clubs in Europe and people booing him and spitting at him and telling him to get off the stage, and he leaves and goes into a subway, and there's kids down there, and he whips out his horn and he plays, and the kids dance for him, and the kids are the ones that understood his music. So that whole first section, autobiographical, biographical, and then it's got this a very mild thesis about improvisation and childhood and freedom. And now I'm on the next section, which is actually about people discovering him. So yeah, I'm having fun with it. I'm not exactly improvising the story, but I am freely drawing what I want to draw. and then I reorder it. And the last that chunk that I just finished, which I consider a quarter of the book, the 30-some pages, I had 2 people read it, and it flowed right, and I was very happy. So it seems like the process is working.
And you're kind of hanging the history of jazz in there, or at least that era of jazz as well. You're mentioning other cats as well, right?
Yeah, well, there's a bit in there where I've got current local jazz players in there as well as the greats in the past. So I did a shorter story where just how I got to jazz, because I didn't start listening to jazz. I grew up listening to, Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith and, hard rock stuff. And then I kind of figured out, got to the heavy metal era, young high school. Then I discovered punk rock, Bad Brains. If you read the first B-sides, there's 2 pieces on Bad Brains, were just huge influence on me. And then somehow I kind of wrapped back around to Zappa. Somehow the punk rock got me to Zappa, and Zappa led me to jazz. And I just self-educated. I self-educated myself. I'm repeating myself there, but I educated myself. And I just kind of went to the store and went, who should I listen to first? And it's like, oh, I've heard of Miles Davis, so I grab a Miles Davis. And oh, I've heard of Duke Ellington, I grab a Duke Ellington. But over the course of time, I just realized I was just kind of looking for my taste. I love Ellington, by the way, huge fan of Ellington. But when I start getting up into Davis and Sonny Rollins and that hard bop and early avant-garde, I just kept pressing it further and further to where I'm listening to like really wild free jazz. And so there's a kind of a punk crossover there for me. It just really attracted me, and because I like noise a lot of times, I like really noisy stuff. So yeah, that I am kind of tying in with that shorter piece, a very brief history of jazz through its styles, shifting of styles. And I started off with Ellington and Armstrong and Lester Young, and then kind of went through the bebop, the hard bop, and then landed in the free jazz. And that's my entry point into the Eiler book.
I kind of went the reverse way. I started off, well, of course, like you, we all start off listening to rock and roll, but in my teens and high school years, I was listening to jazz. I was for a brief time in Illinois, the drinking age was 19, and at 16,
holy cow.
At 16, I could sneak into jazz clubs because they thought I was 19. So I was going to see all these great jazz shows at the Jazz Showcase, and there was a concert venue called the Ivanhoe.
Yes.
And these were just great clubs. And so like in my high school years, I was listening to all these heavy, I started out with fusion, and then gradually worked my way back to, Miles. Then you go further back, and, before you know it, you're listening to King Oliver,
Yeah.
And so then what brought me back was Robert Fripp Exposure.
Yes.
Because it had all these different people on it and all these different genres that made me want to check out XTC and all this. And then before you know it, then you're like, checking out punk rock. So I kind of went the opposite way from jazz to punk. And it seems like there is like this akin between the two, that a lot of punk rockers end up listening to jazz, and a lot of jazz players have to have some respect for punk rock, because
it's especially living where I live, which is South Bay, Los Angeles County. It's just Long Beach, California. Home of SST Records, and there is, LA punk is a little different from like the DC and the New York punk, in that they were listening to some jazz and they were willing to experiment. So people like the Minutemen and Saccharine Trust, and even Black Flag starts using like jazz chords, and they started getting together and just jamming and improvising. So yeah, jazz for us in our area always has been kind of infused a little bit with jazz. Did I say that right? Punk rock has always been kind of infused with jazz for this area for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why that happened that way, but it makes it a really fertile ground for music in this area.
I think more so for the LA scene than the Chicago scene in a way too.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but Chicago had its jazz roots, but they were kind of on two separate sides of town, and
well, and the punk scene there started later for whatever reason. I don't know why it lagged behind like about 4 years, I think.
Yeah, well, they don't call us the Second City for nothing,
I've got a huge, deep love for Chicago punk. Just huge.
Yeah.
I mean, you have no idea how much I love, Big Black and Naked Ray Gun and the Effigies and all those guys.
Yeah, you have mentioned that before. Okay, well, you can tell that Dean and I are music heads, but let's get back to the comics, okay? So you've been working with Jeff for how long?
We started Moses, so it's about 10 to 15 years, I think. I've known him a little longer than that. When I started making comics, I was making them isolated from Jeff. I met him briefly in the class. He got me reading Mouse is basically what he did. That's where I started. And he started teaching. He left school because he graduated a year before me. I didn't see him. I bumped into him at an alternative press expo up in San Francisco, and I had a pile of mini comics, and he had a pile of mini comics. So I can't pinpoint the year. It's really hard, but somewhere along the line, we decided we were going to do a big book because we like big books. And we made a handshake that we'd get together once a week, no matter what, and work on comics. And for the most part, we've lived up to that. And it's about 10, 15 years. Yeah. So
is Moses the first thing you guys did?
Yes. The dumbest thing ever. I'll tell you that.
What's the logistics? I mean, how far? LA is a sprawling city. How far apart are you guys?
Oh, we're like, I don't know, maybe 30 miles or something.
Okay,
I don't know.
That's closer than I kind of thought. So yeah, that's good.
It's not bad. He's down Laguna Beach is technically where he is. Yeah, so yeah, I just drive down to him. He drives over to me. And like there's some weeks in the summer we get together like 3-4 times a week, and it just kind of comics is such a lonely business, as you know, that when you have somebody across from you that's working, and I'm like one of these guys who can work and talk, it just kind of keeps you going, and we drive each other. So Jeff always scripted. Well, every book has been done differently, also like process. Moses was very much. I'll have to model it after like Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, or Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell. That Jeff wrote these. Jeff's a wordsmith. He's a writer. He doesn't like me saying that or anybody saying that, but he's a writer. Screw him. But he wrote these really ornate scripts, breaking down pages and panels, like very traditional. If you've ever seen Alan Moore's script like that, and then just the caveat: chop out anything you want, change anything you want. And so, yeah, I'll circle like 2 or 3 things out of his huge block of text for one panel and draw that and leave some room for words. And so that book probably went through, because he would write it. I would read the script. I might shoot the script back to him saying this needs to be fixed or this ain't right. So there's editing there. Then I would break it down. I'd lay it out on a page. And then we would go back and re-edit it when he'll rewrite it when he's lettering, because he does the lettering, because I hate lettering. So he'll rewrite the script, the words at least, or fine tune the words. And then when he inks it, and we would do like 100, 200 pages at a time before we ever inked. When he went back and started inking, which is a couple of years, he would fine tune it again. So that book went through so many revisions between me and him. It was an unusual process, and we have no ego. We can say this sucks, this needs to change, and nobody gets upset, or we don't argue about ownership. We just go, yes, that's the better choice, and we do it. It was very rare we ever had any tug or pull about anything. If we ever did, I just can't remember if we ever did. I don't think we did. So it was a beautiful process. It was unusual. I'll share this one little bit. Jeff had this story in his head, but he only gave it to me, 40, 50 page scripts, which is a chapter at a time. So I never knew where the story was going. So when I read the scripts, I was like, and when I was drawing the scripts, it was like, it was like a reader reading it for the first time. I had no idea where the story was going. So it was kind of unusual that way for me, because I got to draw it as I read it. Does that make sense? That was weird for me.
Right. You were reading it almost like a periodical yourself.
Yes.
And now, and you guys do everything on the page. You're old school, right? This isn't done in layers or any of that, correct?
Nope. There's nothing digital done on there except for the scanning and laying out white margins on the page. That's it.
Okay, well, we're into the 5-minute finale now. I want to talk a little bit about your radio stuff.
Oh, Jeff and I have been involved with Long Beach has a low power FM that's been fighting to get online for like the last 5 years. It's KLBP Low Power FM. It's public radio. It's nonprofit radio. So they're building the studio as we speak. It's supposed to be up by December. We'll cross our fingers. But Jeff and I have been doing radio shows that you can hear on Mixcloud. If you go to mixcloud.com and just do a quick search for Westerfield show, sorry. You can listen to our shows where we talk about music, we talk about comics, and have guests once in a while. And when we get the studio up, dude, we're going to figure out how to dial you in, and you're going to be on our show at some point. That has definitely been discussed.
Well, you guys got those radio voices, you know. I kind of sound like Chumley from the old Tennessee Tuxedo.
What are you talking about, man? You got a great voice. Like, Jeff is the one who's got the radio voice. I think I'm just kind of barely passing. I don't have it. Jeff's, like I said, man, that dude's like, his talent is words. And he just speaks so well. Like, if you listen to the tail end of I think the first episode we talked about Miracle Man. Oh my gosh, he was like on a roll at the end of that talk. I couldn't say anything when he finished. I had to clap. He was just so good. He's such a good speaker.
Well, that's really good. Hopefully you can help me fine tune this. I hope for this to be an ongoing thing. You're welcome every week. I've got a couple other people lined up that hopefully will join in. I'd like to have it be a free-form panel discussion where, you know, it's a bunch of comic guys talking about their latest projects and, you know, talking about what ink sucks, how to sell these dang things once you create them. Yeah, right. Exactly. You know, it's like it's when I was a kid, I used to go to concerts in Chicago, and there was a free paper called Seed, and there'd always be a guy while you're queuing up for the gig. There'd be a guy standing on a mailbox or garbage can holding up saying, "Seed, seed." That's how I feel right now, you know. It's like, I'm like,
yeah, it's yeah, we've gone to like conventions, and it's like people don't go to conventions to buy comics anymore. They're just there to looky-loo. It's just, yeah, I don't know either. We've got these books. We sold around town. We sold pretty good. The B-sides I've sold pretty well. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I have no idea how to market. I mean, the Eiler book, I kind of have a small built-in audience. You know, a lot of people are looking at it that haven't really realized they're looking at it. I'll go to a local jazz show and somebody comes up and starts talking to me and is like, about, wow, those pages look really good. I don't even know who they are, you know, so I'm getting a little lucky that way. And yeah, I just don't know, man. That's the big mystery. We sit there and we labor at these things years and years, and we get them printed and we're all proud of them, and then crickets.
Exactly.
We were toying at one point having our comic book company be called Audience of One.
Yeah.
We've drawn comics for each other, but.
Well, in one of those 8 balls, Dan Klaus has a motto written in there saying, "Paring my audience down to a elite few."
That's a really positive way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Well, I appreciate you joining me today, and hopefully you'll stop by and bring your partner with you one of these days. And we'll be doing this again next Sunday at same time, same channel, and hopefully people will start checking us out. And these should be available on YouTube. I'm a little new to this, and I'm kind of a Luddite, so I'm not quite sure how this is all going to work out. But
I'm curious too. I've never done it this way either, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm sure glad I had somebody to talk to, and you obviously had more to say than me. So
I felt like I talked too much. I went next time. Maybe we need to focus on your work. I felt like you were asking me about mine, so I just went with it. But
yeah, well, this is the first. I've been Facebook friends with you for a long time. This is the first time we've had a chat, so I really appreciate it. And that's all she wrote. We'll see you next week. Thanks again, Dean. Have a good night. Take care, everybody.
Good night.